Um, I'm Sinead Matson. Thank you for coming and being here with us this evening. I'm just going to give a short introduction about the Tutor Project and say a few words about our new project ambassador, Jamie Kenny. The Tutor Project is a 3-year Erasmus Plus funded research project with the aim of creating more inclusive education. The research partners stretch across the EU, Ireland, Austria, Greece, and Turkey. The 3 main target groups in this research project are the LGBTQI+ community, migrant and ethnic minority communities, such as the traveller community and the Roma community, and students experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage. We do, however, bring an intersectional lens to the research because no person is wholly one aspect of their entire identity. We acknowledge the structures of power and privilege that people live within and experience. And now to our ambassador, Jamie Kenny. Jamie is the Executive Director of Dublin LGBTQ+ Pride and previously worked with several LGBTQI+ organisations in Dublin, Belfast and Derry, both in youth work and in community work roles. Jamie has a passion for supporting marginalised people wishing to engage with queer spaces, making spaces accessible, and tackling stigma and discrimination. Jamie is our very first tutor ambassador for the project here in Ireland, and we are incredibly lucky to have him. And with that, let me hand you over now to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Sinead. Thanks everyone for logging on to listen to me. I won't keep you too long before I introduce our fantastic guests. So as Sinead said, I'm Jamie Kenny. I grew up in a housing estate in Clondalkin. Very happy family. Unfortunately, my father passed away when I was 10. I was raised then by a single mother with my young brother. So I kind of come from an LGBT perspective, but also somebody who came from, I suppose, less privileged background when it comes to socioeconomic circumstances. If you see me look down frequently, it's because I also have been diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, which was a light bulb moment, and therefore I have to keep notes. Otherwise, God knows where we'll go in this. But thanks very much. So on to our guests. So first of all, we have Angela Rickard. So Angela is the Assistant Professor in the Department of Education at Maynooth University, working mainly in the area of initial teacher education. She's currently the course leader for Year 1 of the Professional Master of Education. Angela works to promote education for social justice and teacher education, supporting creative approaches to teaching and learning, including team teaching, and bringing the formal and non-formal sectors, such as teachers and youth workers, together to explore themes of mutual concern. She's currently undertaking a doctorate in education in the University of Bristol, where her dissertation is narrative inquiry exploring LGBTQ+ inclusive practices in schools. Then we have Kerry Archer. Kerry is a special education teacher and has worked in further education and training for the past 15 years. She is currently Professional Learning and Development Coordinator for the City of Dublin ETB and is an adjunct assistant professor in the National College of Ireland, where she lectures on postgraduate courses for further education and training in modules on diversity and inclusion and in assessment and feedback. She's an Associate Fellow of Trinity College Dublin, where she lectures in UDL on a postgraduate certificate in diversity and inclusion for further education training, a course for which she was part of the design team. Kerry is passionate about the visibility of LGBTQ staff and learners in FET, which was the topic of her master's research. As a neurodivergent, yay, there's more than one of us, bisexual educator, she is consistently exploring and challenging how belonging and trust contribute to more inclusive learning environments for learners and staff across and within our education system. We then have Andrew Maloney, who's the Deputy Principal of Fairhouse Educate Together Secondary School, a restorative school context in Dublin that opened in 2018. Andrew's been teaching since 2011 and has taught Irish, music, ethical education, and politics and society. With a master's degree in international relations, Andrew has a huge interest in social justice and social progress. In 2022, Andrew coordinated a small safe space group with the National Association for Principals and Deputy Principals for any LGBTQ+ principals and deputy principals. Until recently, Andrew was a member of Gloria, Dublin's LGBTQ+ choir. So if we're very nice, he might sing for us. But Andrew is very interested in inclusive education, has recently taken up the position of chairperson of Shelleybank's Educate Together National School. And last but not least, we have Owen Houlihan. Owen's been a secondary school teacher for the past 20 years and for the past 8 working as a guidance counselor. He also lectures in Maynooth University on the PME course, teaching SPHE to both Year 1 and 2 students. Owen's been involved in the Stand-Up Week since its inception and coordinated it in 3 different school settings: an urban all-boys school, a rural DEIS mixed secondary school, and in the school he currently teaches in. Owen is currently working in Fairhouse Educate Together Secondary School, which is a restorative practice school. And I mean, he looks great, but he was teaching in the school when I was knocking around at about 14. So he's clearly ancient. But thanks very much, guests, for being with me. So we only have an hour, so I suppose we'll really kick off. And I'm kind of keen to explore the idea of kind of inclusivity when it comes to curriculum. What does that look like? And how does like incorporating LGBTQ plus perspectives and contributions into curriculum, how can that enrich the learning experience for students? And I suppose what challenges are there, you know, if there's any pushback from communities or institutions when you're attempting to integrate LGBTQ plus issues into the curriculum. So I think I'll just pick somebody at random. So if I go to you, Kerry, first to chime in, and then hopefully our other guests will be able to chime in with their thoughts.
Super, Jamie. So unlike you, I didn't write notes, so this could go absolutely anywhere. But thanks. Yeah, I think because I work in further education, it's probably a little bit different in that, you know, there are module descriptors. That's what we get, and people teach lots and lots and lots of different things, as opposed to having your set subjects with a set exam at the end and the set pieces that you need to do. So from that curriculum perspective, there's actually so many ways that you can include LGBT topics or not include LGBT topics, right? So I think we have a massive kind of blank slate to be able to bring lots of things into a curriculum, but there's also a really, really good way for us to kind of not make it visible, to not bring anything in. So when I was doing my research, I got a couple of FET teachers. I'm going to tell you that was hard, because my research was how do teachers in FET promote the invisibility of their LGBT students in the classroom. So trying to get people to participate in that was really difficult. But the curriculum or the module descriptors were one of the big things that came up. It's not written on my curriculum, right? So it's not written on a massive amount of the curriculum. Yes, people saw, if I'm teaching a module on equality and diversity, then it's there. However, when we started to explore it, the business teachers started to look, and through this like iterative process started to go, do you know what, actually employment legislation, if we're looking at the Equal Status Act, if I'm looking at any of these different pieces, like it's an open book that you can choose whatever topics or make suggestions. So, right, it's not on a module descriptor, but yes, it is something that we've got a lot of kind of leeway to be able to do. Our early learning and childcare teachers, so much scope there. You know, the INTO, the same different families, same love, that whole piece is still something that's really, really easy to use in the early learning and care. So teachers started to look and kind of go, actually, you know, this is really important, because we're going to have families who are coming in who are not, you know, all your heteronormative straight families coming in with their 2.4 kids and the dog. And they started to see, right, well, what are the materials that I could choose that I could include in this? So beauty, my God, that's my subject. So beauty and holistic massage. Like beauty from a business perspective, absolutely massive, you know, looking at the whole laser hair removal industry. So, I mean, there's absolutely loads and loads and loads of ways, you know, put that in with digital marketing and there you go, you know, a bit of entrepreneurship. So there's huge scope beyond what's written on a piece of paper if you look for it. And so, yeah, loads of opportunities, but the challenges are it's perhaps only written in an equality and diversity module that could be taught on one level 5 program or perhaps a level 6. So yeah, it's about being open.
Thank you very much for that. And I suppose I'd be interested around curriculum inclusivity then, I suppose, well, from all of you, but once again, just I'll pick one out of the hat. So Andrew, like how important do you think it is to have that kind of representation flowing through curriculum?
I think it's so important to see that representation, because for students to see themselves in textbooks, in materials created by teachers, in discussions in the classroom, that's when people begin to feel a sense of, oh, my identity is seen, heard, shared with the community. And I think with the, I was going to say recent reform of junior cycle, but we're there now. With the reform of junior cycle, it created a huge opportunity for teachers to work with learning outcomes. And so there's an awful lot of flexibility, similar to what Carrie was saying in the further education and training sector. Teachers have a lot of choice over what they do and choose to introduce to classes. And I think that, yes, while we have stand-up week and stand-up month, and they are fantastic weeks and should be celebrated, I think it's very important that teachers realize the power that they have to actually bring in identities within their own subject, and not as a, oh, it's stand-up week this week, so therefore we are going to do the music of Benjamin Britten, or it's science week, or it's stand-up week, so we're going to study this scientist. I'm a music teacher myself, and I know that I always would have put emphasis on LGBTQ plus composers and artists. However, it's important that it's peppered out throughout the curriculum, so that it's not seen as a tick the box exercise, that no more than we read about in music about Bach had like something ridiculous like 14 children. And you read about the heteronormative biographies of certain composers. It's important too that we celebrate and open that up. But teachers now, with junior cycle in particular, have an awful lot of power over the narratives that they introduce to their classrooms. And I think that's a really, really positive step forward.
Yeah, and I think it's probably also, not only are you recognizing the kind of cultural heritage of LGBTQ plus communities and kind of celebrating those milestones, but I think you're probably doing two other things. You're validating students who may be LGBTQ plus in your classroom, but also you are helping create advocates and allies amongst their peers, you know, because you're shining something positive onto it, but it's a consistent thing rather than just that 1 week or that 1 day of year, you know. What would you think?
When it's peppered out throughout the curriculum like that, I think then it's a much stronger long-term approach to it being seen as the norm. You know, there's not the eye roll of, oh, it's this week, it's that week, it's this week, it's that week. And that's so important. I'm not denying the importance of having to celebrate, but I just think in all of the school weeks that we have, it's so important that we can pepper in all the identities into the curriculum over the course of junior cycle and senior cycle.
And then could I ask you kind of what your thoughts of it are, Angela, because obviously you've done extensive work in the area and visit schools as well and kind of see the impact of when it works.
Certainly, yeah. Thanks, Jamie. I just thinking back to what Carrie has said about things not being in the curriculum or not being written in. The other thing is that they're not written in, and I echo that in a second level. And as to what Andrew is saying as well, that there's ample opportunities, and I think one of the ways to think about it is in terms of planning. And what I've seen a very good practice in some schools is where a teacher will actually sit down or develop templates that include where are the opportunities in this subject and that subject, because I think a lot of LGBTQ teachers can think of ways like, kind of off the top of our head, where you might include, a scientist, a musician, historically, you might think of languages where you might challenge the heteronormative language of, family structures. They're talking about la mère et le père, when in a French class, when you can actually just push back against that. And not everybody will think of doing that. So I think having planning templates that include And it's not as a tick the box, but as just an opportunity. And for teachers, I suppose, to spend a little bit of time on that. So I think at the level of planning, and I think at the level of policy in a school, it's actually at that level where it isn't dependent on the LGBTQ teacher to do that, all of that work themselves, that it should be actually a whole school approach. And the other thing about curriculum is, I think it is an absent piece in the Irish curriculum. And one of the I think best examples I can think of in terms of policy is the Scottish curriculum, because it is mandated within the Scottish curriculum to have representation of LGBTQ plus people, and there are resources to support that. And I think that when you have some of the work done by people who are developing textbooks or developing resources, and coming back to Andrew's point about the reformed junior cycle, that creates opportunities, but it also puts a burden on teachers to develop resources. And I think there's a balance to be struck, where I think the tutor project that we're speaking within in this webinar is a case in point, because here is a project where inclusive education is actually developing those types of resources that teachers can avail of. So yeah, I mean, that's my tuppence halfpenny on the curriculum. There's lots more to say about it, but I think the opportunities are there, but I think the supports need to come from a larger structure, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Hit the nail on the head. And there are longer conversations to be had. I'm sure we could probably be here for 4 hours if we let ourselves. But and then Owen, I suppose you've been involved, as I read it in your bio there, for stand up and have worked in numerous kind of environments where you've kind of seen successes and not. So what would you reckon about the importance of kind of like incorporating LGBTQ plus perspectives into your teaching?
Yeah, I suppose I've been like, I suppose I taught in all boys school, as you said earlier on. I taught for you were, and how saw how tough that was in the noughties in terms of, and how that kind of moved on. And I suppose what was really important was the allies in that it wasn't just the, myself as an LGBT teacher being the one having to fly the flag, because even with that, there was a struggle within myself teaching in an all boys school and being gay, and all that was in my head that was really, and that still goes on and still exists, with people, because I suppose it's decades of that just being ingrained, and as everyone has said there, that kind of heteronormative society. And actually, it's interesting when you say it to students, heteronormative, they go, "What's that?" And then you explain it to them. And it's amazing how they actually, there's a shift in their thinking, and they go, "Oh yeah, I didn't actually think about it like that." And I think with the curriculum, what is great, I think, like Stand Up Week, it has moved on to, being so much more, and people have become a lot more creative. And one of the things that they've actually done is actually look at the junior cycle, and actually they've done a series of worksheets for each subject, and kind of looking at, so if it's in geography, maybe looking at the migration of LGBT people, particularly in the current climate in terms of fleeing persecution, and looking at that geopolitical kind of element of it, particularly what's going on in the world. So being able to incorporate that into it, and even, within my own subject now of guidance, kind of looking at careers, looking at opportunities that people can use various jobs, whether it's, a lawyer or whatever it might be, a human rights lawyer for, and advocates for LGBT people, both here in Ireland and across the world. So I think, what is great is that that's there now. Mathematics is the same thing, incorporating that, looking at statistics, looking at the census, and, how the questions in the census have changed over the years in terms of incorporating incorporating all the various families. And I suppose we have that referendum now coming up, and looking at the actual, how our constitution is potentially going to be changed in terms of recognizing this new, not that it's new actually, because these families have always been around, but actually recognizing what's been there for a long time. So I think those kind of conversations that you're having all the time, you know, I find myself, like what Andrew said there, it's not just about that single week, it's about that conversation all the time. And just, I hate using the word, just normalizing it, because like it is, you know what I mean? I don't know why I always feel uncomfortable with that word, normalizing it, because you know that, you know, but you know what I mean. I think it's just having that conversation and making people feel comfortable. And you know, like what people said there, that you know, people kind of go, oh, that's me, you know, but you know, and also then, you know, looking at, you know, people of color, we've travelers, we've all of these people within the LGBT community, you know, and the various struggles then within that. So you know, I do think there's lots of opportunities there, and I think, I suppose the challenge is, I suppose, is educating teachers so that they know, because I think one of the things, and I find it quite challenging, is all the new terms that are coming out. And there's a bit of eye roll and kind of go, oh, geez, you know, but kind of actually bringing that back and kind of going, no, these were always there. It's just people didn't have the language for it. So it's about talking about that and people feeling comfortable around that language. And you know, I was doing it with the PMEs there recently, and I think there was something like 50 something different, you know, types of sexualities, you know, that are out there. And they were like, geez, I thought there were, you know, there was only 5 or whatever. So it's about exploring that, and you know, and kind of saying, no, this is, you know, you kind of draw the line, and some people are somewhere on that line, you know, and kind of for people to understand that. So I suppose for me, that's the opportunities within education, both at second level and also at third level.
Thanks a million. So then I suppose we move on to the topic of kind of teacher training. So I mean, like, how important do you think training teachers is to create that inclusive, supportive classroom for their like LGBTQ plus students? So like, you know, covering topics such as diverse identities, addressing biases, which we all have, even us queers have bias, and then I suppose getting used to using more inclusive language, and then what barriers are there for educators in terms of resources and all the rest. So if we go to you, Angela, first.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Jamie. You know, how important was your first question? And you know, I think we're all agreed there's, you know, it's hugely important, but also for the reasons Owen has mentioned, not just for LGBT people, but for the, I suppose, the civilizing effect it has to be inclusive towards everybody, and to think in terms of how we all gain actually from learning to live well with other people. And it's the kind of otherness, I suppose, for a lot of people, you know, again, as Owen said, the language people have or don't have, it's uncomfortable if you feel that you can't speak about or to someone because you don't have the language, or, you know, you're afraid that you're going to cause offense. And sometimes maybe, I mean, kind of jumping around a bit, I'm thinking my fundamental thought about this is that it's not a difficult thing to do, in that you're pushing an open door with student teachers, certainly. And I think student teachers are eager to be at the forefront, actually, of changing this conversation in schools, and are eager to be decent, and to work with their students in a way that's respectful. So that's my experience of student teachers. And I think there's an eagerness there. They've also, over the last number of years, student teachers in Maynooth have produced the most amazing dissertations looking at the experience of LGBT students in schools and the experiences of teachers trying to navigate what is really a new terrain, and a kind of a new reality, in terms of just the greater visibility of LGBTQ people. So in terms of barriers, I would say maybe time is against us in lots of ways because there's so many things to cover. And I think to uncover and to really go deeply into you mentioned it, Jamie, that we do all have biases, and it's not always comfortable to try to address those. So actually spending a bit of time with that discomfort, I think, is an important thing to do, but it's also a challenging thing to do when you have a class of 120 students, and you're trying to ensure that their well-being is also catered for, and they're not overwhelmed with topics and themes, and that they're not overwhelmed with work. And yeah, so that it's I suppose it can be disconcerting. So it's a matter of being careful with student teachers who are also having to, they have a lot to do. And they've to balance being a teacher half of the week in the case of Maynooth, and being a student the other half of the week, and keep shifting. Like, talk about identities, they're shifting in these two different roles. And I'd say most of the audience here may be teachers and will know what that's like, and it is extremely challenging. But I think there isn't a barrier in terms of attitudes that I can see. I think what it is a reluctance sometimes to engage with something where you feel that you don't understand or you don't know the thing. And I think that's probably an occupational hazard of teachers, that they feel they should know the thing before they're talking about it. So I'll say this and then maybe hand over to someone else, but one of the things that I've seen a lot of, and again, Owen was mentioning about the stand-up week and the work that's being done, and it's worth naming that work is being done by Belong To, and the immense work that has gone into creating, first of all, the Safe and Supportive Schools initiative, which has now become the quality mark. There are amazing resources within that structure, and that's teacher education. So you use the term teacher training, and I suppose for me the term is probably better, teacher education. But there's initial teacher education and there's continuing teacher education, and I think some of the work can be done in initial teacher education when teachers are students still. And there's a depth of work that can be done as part of the program, but teacher education doesn't stop when you get qualified. And I think that it's important to think about it as a continuum. And I think that ongoing continuous professional development or teacher education that happens with the help of well-informed and well-resourced advocates like Belong To, and other organizations that have been working in this space. I think that they're producing resources and structures, and they're thinking in terms of leadership, they're thinking in terms of school policy, they're thinking in terms of engagement at a community level. So it's broader than just what you do in your initial teacher education. It's actually ongoing. And again, just to echo Owen's point about it's a continuing changing space, in that this is newness, and newness keeps coming. There are new identities, and not so much that they're new, but there are new ways to express that young people are expressing themselves, and that's all for the good. Young people should be able to express themselves exactly the way they want to, and there shouldn't be any there's no reason why they can't. So it is up to the adults to try to figure out, how do you respond and how do you support young people in that journey, because they're learning to be themselves, and that should be what education is about. Sorry, I'm getting into a soapbox about what education should be about, but I'll hand over to someone else. But those are my thoughts on the teacher education piece.
Thanks a million, Angela. I was a Belong To baby, so they created this monster you see before you. I'd be interested, what's your take on it all then, Andrew?
I think that teachers want to be able to have discussions, and I think, as Angela said there, empowering them with the actual language and the confidence to do it. But I think something that really is striking me at the moment is the law around it. And I suppose reminding teachers that this is not some sort of extravagant, whimsical, off the beaten track thing that you are doing if you are talking about LGBTQ plus communities, that it's actually something that is fully legal to talk about. Like, we're no longer living in the Stone Age. And I think that genuinely people have to be reminded about that, because in Irish culture, there's a little bit of stigma, shame still surrounding that. And I as Owen was saying earlier, I think that as we go forward and the voices who dissent might get louder, I think it's important to back teachers up, particularly teachers who are in teacher education, to understand that actually you have a legal basis to discuss this in your classroom. It's not up for debate. It's not up for discussion. And I just find that a lot of teachers need that reassurance, and particularly from school leaders, they need to hear that openly, because if they don't hear it openly, it's not good enough just to be implicit about it because it happens to be enshrined in law. School leaders have to be very comfortable and open to be saying that, yes, this is absolutely fine. This is what we want to see in our schools. And should any challenge come our way in relation to a parent questioning something, we have your back. And I think that's very important, that the teachers and teacher education understand the legal framework from which it's coming.
100%, yeah. And I think it's very interesting just to go back to what Angela said about continuous professional development, because of course professional development is also personal development, because you can never know enough. It informs you and shapes you as a person. So it's very interesting. Like, they're not mutually exclusive, I suppose. What about yourself, Kerry, then? What do you think the importance is, I suppose, of teacher education and those kind of themes?
Yeah, like, I feel exceptionally privileged, to be honest. Being able to teach an initial teacher education for FET, but then I also have an opportunity with the continual professional development of staff in City of Dublin. So I have that position where I'm able to see what's going on, both at the early stages and when people are embarking on their career, when you get a chance to get in and kind of go, right, these things are really important. But then also as people progress through their careers, because we also have to acknowledge that, we're not separate to our learners. Like just what you've said there, our own identities, like I can't separate my own identity from how I teach and from the approach that I take and from what's really important to me. I'm values led. So if something doesn't feed my own values, I can't actually, bring my whole self to that. And that's a massive challenge. Like, I went on a huge journey myself about my own identity. When I was teaching beauty, very much nobody would have known that I was bi. Absolutely not. As a beauty teacher, I felt exceptionally uncomfortable because of narratives and conversations that had carried with me through my whole life that I'd heard about that wouldn't have been appropriate, or that I was in some way jeopardizing my students' education by bringing my whole self to work. And it took a really long time, and it was not easy to be out. And that was in my staff room at certain stages, and then in the classroom for a long time after that. So I think that idea of us going back to what actually are our values, like what are we here to do? And if your values are to, I'm just going to deliver this curriculum to this group of students to get them to that point to go out, like, that's one thing. That's not where I come from. I see that we have this massive opportunity to really reach into the hearts and the lives of everybody that we come into contact with. And what we want is to have a socially just society. So it's not just about the LGBT students, and it's not just about the LGBT teachers. It's not just about the topics. It's a much wider piece about our own responsibility to the world that we want to live in. But like I've said, it's the only thing as a coordinator that I've had pushback against has been some of the pieces that we've done about working with different organizations or bringing in any LGBT training or any of those different pieces. It's the only thing I've ever been questioned on, you know, and they're individuals. It's not a whole piece, but from my that puts you in a very different position as well, which is why I see it's so important to have allies and to have your advocates. So the people who are not a member of the LGBTQ community, who just know that this is the right thing to do. Yeah, and that was one of the things that I found even in my own research. A teacher who was lesbian, who was completely pushed back against in her own college because she used LGBT related topics and resources at the time, and nobody else did. You know, so I think that from that perspective, I think if we keep going back to what's our reason for teaching, why are we actually here, and going a little bit back there as well to the idea of leadership. You know, you've got to lead for inclusion. That's it. Like, your staff have to feel safe. Your staff have to feel like they belong, and that they're not just trying to fit in to, you know, the staff room as it is, but actually embraced for the diverse way that they look at things and what they bring into the staff room, the classroom, the boardroom, wherever. So that's my piece, is that actually it's not about the topic or the group. It's about your values and what we're actually here to do.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amelia. And Owen, I suppose, as Kerry was saying, the importance of advocates and allies, because we've seen that it's a lot different now than it was a few years ago, where it was always left to the gay teacher or the lesbian teacher to do that kind of thing. So how important do you think that solidarity, I prefer the term solidarity than allyship, how important do you think that is when it comes to teacher training or education? Sorry, Angela.
Yeah, it's hugely important, and I think it's important. Like, it's interesting. Like, when I do this, and like I'm currently doing it, covering it in the SPHE methodologies at the moment, and it's actually quite interesting because I start this out by asking them what was their experiences in school in terms of, you know, the LGBT message that they got when they were in school. And actually, it surprised me how many of them said we actually didn't get anything. Like, we weren't aware of it. We don't know anything about the terms. You know, it was kind of done for, it kind of goes back to what Andrew said. We kind of done for a week, and if you happened to be in or in a certain class, you heard it, and if you didn't, that was it. So it is that kind of thing of I suppose empowering them and giving them the language and the understanding of what this is, and that it's okay not to know some of the stuff, you know. And I think that's important as well, because I don't know it all, and I'm gay, you know. And so that's, you know, so that's, to me, it's about directing them, and it's a bit like what Angela said. It doesn't stop in college. It's like Belong To have been, absolutely, like, they are just incredible. Them, Shout Out, you know, Tenny, all these organizations, and directing them towards that and saying these are supports you can use. But then also kind of looking at, you know, popular programs at the moment, like Heartstoppers. You know, what a positive, beautiful, amazing program at the moment, telling the story of an LGBT lives, and direct him to that, because, like, I even learned so much from watching something like that, you know, and just being very kind of positive about the stuff that's out there. And I think, you know, I don't know, I can't remember, I think it was earlier when I was talking to Andrew at something, you know, I was kind of sometimes we talk about LGBT and it's the victims all the time. And, you know, sometimes we have to put out the positives as well, that, you know, we're not, you know, that we're not this downtrodden group of people in society. We really need to kind of show the positive as well, because, you know, that can, you know, that can have an impact on you as an individual if you're constantly feeling that you have to try and fight the victim, you know, and actually give the positive stuff. So I think, you know, within colleges, it's and it's beyond the SPHE as well. Like, I'd love to see it, you know, with other methodologists, you know, talking about this issue in their subjects, and using the Belong To resources to kind of say, listen, you can use this in maths or whatever it might be, or geography or CSP or whatever.
Thanks a million. And I suppose then one topic I'm interested in exploring is because we hear the topic a lot, is the topic of safe spaces. And I suppose the idea of safe spaces versus brave spaces. And naturally, we want all people who are learning to feel safe, to feel valued. So it's not about, shouting people down. But I suppose it's just that idea that sometimes discomfort and things that actually challenge us and how we think and how we feel are kind of acknowledged as part of the learning process. So I suppose, like, if I go to you, Andrew, like, how do you feel kind of embracing sometimes uncomfortable topics can lead to maybe deeper understanding of kind of where other people are coming from? I suppose especially when you're addressing kind of more complex topics related to LGBTQ issues. One example I would give is we've seen, thanks to large misinformation campaigns, a lot of people now have questions because they're getting told one thing on Facebook or whatever about the trans community. I've had conversations like that with people in my own life, but sometimes most people are fundamentally good and they actually just want to understand, but they're afraid to ask the question in case they feel like they're accused of being prejudiced or bigoted or whatever. So what do you think about that?
It's very interesting because I just had an experience over the last few weeks with a student where, like that, they were asking the questions to really learn. Perhaps from home they hadn't gotten the answers, or gotten answers that they thought were right. And again, I kind of I paused. I remember in that moment, and I went, "Oh my God, okay." Like, he was challenging to a point, asking a lot of questions, but I had to really remain calm about it and be like, this is a real learning moment for the student. And I think to get the information out there and to humanize things is so important. We were talking about transgender rights in this case, and I constantly went back to, I can, do the whole legal aspect of it and do the whole, well, this is what it is, but it's actually bringing in the humane aspect of it, and the empathy building point of it is really, really important with students. But I suppose if we look at a brave space versus a safe space, as Owen alluded to earlier, the safe space is kind of where you're constantly on guard to protect, whereas the brave space is a space where people can celebrate who they are, and that questions can be asked in a healthy way, and discussions can happen. But the brave space needs people to stand up and say this is a brave space, because I think we all think of it from a wider societal point of view. We all feel reassured about when we feel protected, whether that is in the form of government, whether that is in the form of family, whether that is in the form of friends. And I think that schools and educational institutions can be those places where those celebrations happen. And I think to celebrate is a very important place in a brave space. And I think that's the healthiest model, hopefully going forward, that we can strive to achieve in a lot of schools in Ireland.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's actually very, very insightful. I'd ask then you kind of a similar question, Angela, because I know you ran an event with Dr. Sean Henry for a number of years in there for LGBTQ kind of issues. And what I knew from that sometimes conversation, it was a good model for, I think, sometimes questions would be asked by people that didn't necessarily mean to offend at all, but they might just not have the language. But the events were framed in it is a brave space. We can have these conversations because they're done in a very respectful way.
Mm. Thanks for mentioning that, Jamie. It was actually a very interesting experience to put that event on the calendar, as it were, because it came from a brave move, if you like, if you don't mind me kind of saying that about something I did myself, because one of the things was we've talked, a number of us have mentioned how, you know, you have to bring part of yourself into your teaching, and that's something I think I've been reluctant to do, because in a way I kind of think my private life is my private life, and you know, I'm not really sure that I want to be talking about my private life, and I know other people feel differently, and I'm completely in agreement with it. Should be possible for me to do that. If it's my choice not to, that's also fine. But it took a little bit of bravery to say, look, marriage equality is a big talking point at the moment. Back in 2015. And at the time I thought, actually, our student teachers are going into schools unprepared for actually being lesbian or bisexual or gay. And they're going into schools without any kind of sense that they've any kind of backup. Andrew mentioned earlier on about school leaders having their back. And I think that for me, one of the things in all of that was that we weren't really serving our students very well by not having something very visible and making a statement. And the suggestion was that we would call for a yes vote, and there wasn't a complete consensus about that in our department, but what we did have was an immediate response from colleagues who said, well, let's actually do something. And actually the colleague in question who did that is Bernie Grummel, who's in this call as well. And Bernie's point was, actually, we need to respond to schools who are now navigating this new legislation without really much guidance. And so what we put in place was an event we called Opening Conversations. And it did two things. So it was about beginning a conversation. So an opening conversation that was happening for the first time, certainly in our department. And it was, I think, like you suggested in your question, an opportunity for us to do that in a creative way, and for those conversations to have the effect of being opening, if I'm not explaining that very well, but make us more open. And we did that with bringing in school leaders, guidance counselors, young people, NGOs, various different people who came into the space to have the kinds of conversation and to do that in creative ways. So we had, lovely kind of workshops and a creative writing workshop. I remember one of the things that I went to, and we replicated the event then as an event for student teachers after that. So it was a full day event. But how that's moved on now is that, in a way, it's now embedded, not as a standalone event, but as part of a module. And I think things have evolved in that way because of the brave moments, and there's moments of our department being sort of just changing the narrative in teacher education. So that move occurred around then, but for that reason. And the idea of safety and bravery, I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive, but I do think it's important not to only think in terms of safety, because it fits with that, reiterating a narrative of victimhood that, as Owen has said, it's not that helpful. It's important to bear in mind, because I don't think you can lose sight of the fact that some people do continue to be oppressed, vilified, beaten. There are still shocking stories of people being attacked for their identity for no other reason than just that they look gay, or that they it may not, it's mind-boggling even to think about it. So that does still happen, and it is still important to think about how do we ensure that doesn't happen or continue to happen. But how also do we think about young people as actually having agency themselves, not needing teachers to hold their hands for everything they do, actually creating the space for them to be is probably more important than creating a place for everybody to feel safe. And I think the safeness can also shut down conversations. So I'm an advocate for brave moves, But I also think they need to be supported. And I think teachers need to be able to be brave themselves to say, actually, this is a little uncomfortable. This is outside my comfort zone. But let's go with it. Let's see if we can, get people to understand why we talk in this way and not in that way. And if you're saying something that's offensive, let's figure out a way how to say that in a way that isn't so offensive, but we still respect you. And we hold on to you in our classroom, because young people are working these things out. And I don't think it should be expected that they have them completely figured out before they say things out loud. And I think that's the point of teachers being able to help them to develop their own thoughts, but in ways that are within an appropriate and acceptable form of language and form of expression.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Angela. So Kerry, what do you kind of think about the concept of safe versus brave? And actually, now that I look at my notes, I think Angela's quite right in terms of it's not one versus the other necessarily. It's, you want people to feel safe, but you also want them to feel brave, to be able to kind of have those conversations.
Yeah, and it's definitely definitely is a challenge, because you've got to, it's especially when it's something that's really, really close to you, when those brave conversations, when somebody else has been brave to open up those conversations, you've got to do a lot of navel gazing, and how do I remove myself from this a little bit and actually give this person the space that they need to explore this, and how do I phrase my questions and reflect back to them what I'm hearing from them, as opposed to coming from a space of judgment, which I think is really, really important. But they're skills, I think that it's important that we also acknowledge that it's not always easy, and that there is a lot of development of skills needed to be able to have those conversations with people also. And I definitely am going to say thank you to Bernie and to Angela, because I was at opening conversations all that time, back when it was in Maynooth. At the time, I was just doing my thesis at the time, and that was the one thing I was like, this is the type of space I like to be in. And I hadn't been privy to something like that previously. And I thought, how important is it to have this one big space where we're all having these conversations, and there's all of this different stuff happening. And it's actually okay to be a member of the LGBT community and to have all of this stuff going on. But yeah, that's because there's two things, isn't there? You want to stand out, but you want to fit in. So that can only happen in places. Yes, there has to be some safety there, but there also has to be bravery for you to be able to be unique and to stand out as well as fit in.
Thanks very much, Kerry. And Owen, over to you to finish us out before I wrap us up, because God, Jesus, it's 7:57 already. Been nattering.
Well, I think I'll just pick up one thing that you said, Jamie, and I think it's probably, the biggest challenge of our time at the moment is misinformation and disinformation. And I think, that is the big challenge. And I'll give you a very simple example. In class the other day, somebody brought up the thing about boxing, and the boxing is coming out of the 2028 LA Olympics, and instead is because of transgender, and the women want to fight with men, that whole narrative. And I was just like, oh, and I remember somewhere vaguely hearing something I don't know about, and I was like, oh, so I kind of just went, all right, okay, or whatever. But actually, when I went to do my research on it, I discovered that it had nothing to do with that at all. It was to do with that they want to introduce more games, and actually the judging from the Rio Olympics was not very good, and that's the reason why boxing is being dropped from the 2028. So I suppose for us to kind of, I suppose what was important for me was not to challenge that student in that moment, because I didn't know whether that was true or false. So I kind of just went, all right, well, maybe we might look at that, and I'll come back to that, and then move the conversation to another space. But now I feel comfortable to kind of go back and say, well, actually, no, I did a research on this, and, and that child is coming from, you know, a particular, you know, they're not necessarily, I don't think it was disinformation they were doing. It was actually misinformation from disinformation, if you know what I mean. And that's where it gets very complicated because, you know, he was coming at it honestly thinking that that was the reason, and like his opportunity to become a boxer in the LA Olympics in 2028 wasn't going to be seen because of trans people. So I think for me, that is the thing. And it's important for us, I suppose, to kind of acknowledge that and I suppose educate ourselves in that because that is the huge challenge.
Thanks very much, Owen. Oh, look, we're at 8 o'clock. No, thank you so much to everybody for joining us tonight. I would like to give a huge thank you and a show of appreciation to Owen, Andrew, Kerry, and Angela. And of course, a big thank you to Bernie, Alfie, and the superstar that is Sinead Matson for making it all happen tonight. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.
Thanks very much.
You.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jamie.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks,
Thanks for
Sinead.
coming.